My sister stranded me in Rome, stole my passport and wallet, then emailed to teach me not to be entitled. It completely changed my life. My sister Diane has hated me since our parents died and left me the house. It wasn't even a nice house, just a regular 3-bedroom in Ohio. But Diane got their savings, almost $200,000, while I got the mortgage payments. She never let me forget how unfair it was. Last May, she called me out of nowhere. I'm planning a trip to Italy. You should come. Sister's trip. It'll be fun. We can work on our relationship. This was suspicious. Diane hadn't spoken to me nicely in 3 years. But our aunt had been nagging us about making peace before she died. I thought maybe Diane actually wanted to try. I should have known better. The trip started fine. We landed in Rome. Diane had planned everything. She had the hotel reservations, the tour bookings, all on her phone. I just followed along like an idiot. Day 3, we were at the Trevi Fountain. Diane said she needed the bathroom. Hold my phone. I need you to take pictures when I get back. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. I asked a vendor if he'd seen a woman. Blonde, blue dress. He shrugged. I waited 3 hours. Finally, I walked back to our hotel. The desk clerk looked confused. Your sister checked out this morning. She said you were taking an earlier flight. My suitcase was sitting in the lobby. But my passport, my wallet, my phone, everything was in Diane's bag because she insisted on carrying everything for safety. I had 40 euros in my pocket. The embassy was closed until Monday. It was Friday night. I used the hotel computer to check my email. Diane had sent me a message. Maybe this will teach you not to be so entitled. Find your own way home, princess. She'd taken photos of my passport and credit cards before leaving, just to prove she could have helped but chose not to. I was standing outside the hotel, trying not to cry, when this man approached me. You look lost. Can I help? His English was perfect but accented. I normally would have walked away, but I had nothing left to lose. My sister stranded me here. She took my passport and cards. I have 40 euros and nowhere to stay. He studied my face for a moment. I'm Luca. Come have dinner with me. You can use my phone to call someone. I had nobody to call, but I was hungry and scared. Luca took me to this tiny restaurant where everyone knew him. He ordered in rapid Italian, then handed me his phone. Call whoever you need. I admitted I had nobody. My parents were dead. My sister had just abandoned me. No other family. Luca listened to the whole story. Then he said something I'll never forget. Your sister is an idiot. Anyone who'd throw away family like that doesn't deserve you. Stay at my apartment tonight. Tomorrow we'll go to the embassy. I know someone who works there. I should have been terrified, but Luca called his mother right there, put her on speaker, and told her about me in Italian. She switched to English. You stay with my Luca. He's a good boy. Any girl who needs help, he helps. Don't worry. The embassy visit Monday took 10 minutes. Luca's friend fast-tracked everything. While waiting for my emergency passport, Luca showed me Rome. Not tourist Rome. His Rome. Hidden restaurants, family vineyards, his grandfather's bakery. We talked for hours every day. He was a contract lawyer for international firms. He'd lived in London for 5 years, which explained his perfect English. By Wednesday, I had my passport but didn't want to leave. Luca felt the same. Stay longer. I'll buy your new ticket. Change it to next month. I stayed. 1 month became 2. I moved into his apartment. His family adopted me completely. His mother taught me to make pasta. His father showed me his wine collection. They had more money than I'd ever seen but acted like normal people. In August, Diane started calling my work. Where was I? Why wasn't I home? My coworker told her I'd quit. Moved to Italy. Diane freaked out. She called my phone, which I'd replaced. How dare you just move to Italy? That's insane. You can't just abandon your life. Funny. You abandoned me there. I figured I should stay. Why does it matter to you? Because the house. I need you to sell it. I want my half. There is no your half. Mom and Dad left it to me. You got the money, remember? But now you're gone. I should get the house. I'm here. Diane flew to Rome in September. She'd found Luca's law firm online, showed up at his office. I want to talk to my sister. Alone. Luca called me, amused. Your sister is here demanding things. Should I have security remove her? Let me talk to her. Diane had gained weight. Stress eating, probably. Her husband had left her. Took half the money in the divorce. She needed cash. You owe me for abandoning you. If I hadn't left you here, you'd never have met him. I looked at her standing there in the lobby, sweat stains under her arms, makeup running in the Rome heat. She actually thought she deserved credit for this, for abandoning me here and somehow creating my happiness through cruelty. I walked closer, keeping my voice steady. We can talk, but not here, and not alone. She blinked like I'd slapped her. What do you mean, not alone? I'm your sister. You lost that right at the fountain. Luca appeared beside me, his hand light on my back. We can meet tomorrow morning at the cafe downstairs. I'll be present as her representative. Diane's face went red. This is family business. It's private. I shook my head. Nothing between us is private anymore. You made sure of that when you stole my documents and left me stranded. Luca pulled out his phone, typing something. 9 tomorrow morning. The cafe has a private corner. We'll discuss whatever you came here to discuss, with proper documentation. Diane looked between us, her mouth opening and closing. You can't just bring a lawyer to a family conversation. He's not just my lawyer. And this isn't a conversation. It's you demanding things you have no right to. Take the meeting or don't. Your choice. She grabbed her purse tighter. Fine. 9 tomorrow. But this is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. I turned and walked toward the elevator, not waiting to see if she'd follow or leave. That evening, Luca's mother was already cooking when we got to their house. She looked up from the stove, smiling until she saw our faces. What happened? Luca explained in Italian while I sat at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. His mother's expression shifted from confusion to anger. She switched to English, her accent thicker when she was upset. She left you at the fountain? Took your papers? And now she wants money? I nodded. She showed up at the office today. Says I owe her because if she hadn't abandoned me, I never would have met Luca. His mother made a sharp gesture, wooden spoon pointing at the ceiling. Crudelta. Cruelty. This is not family. Family does not do this. She doesn't deserve your time. But I have to deal with the house situation. I can't let her keep making claims on it or showing up randomly. I need clear boundaries. Luca pulled out a notepad, clicking his pen. So tomorrow we establish those boundaries legally. She can't contact you directly anymore. Everything goes through the firm. His mother brought over a plate of bread and cheese. You are too kind to this sister. She would not be kind to you. I know. But I need to do this right so it's finished. No more surprise visits. No more demands. Just done. The cafe the next morning was quiet. Just a few other people reading newspapers or working on laptops. Diane was already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner table Luca had reserved. She'd tried to fix herself up. Different clothes, hair pulled back, fresh makeup. But up close, the changes were obvious. She'd gained maybe 30 pounds since I last saw her in person. Dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Her shirt was from Target, not the designer brands she used to wear. She stood when we approached, attempting a smile. You look really good. Italy obviously agrees with you. I sat across from her without responding to the compliment. What do you want, Diane? Her smile faltered. Can we at least pretend to be civil? I came all this way. You came for a reason. Let's talk about that reason. Luca sat beside me, notepad open, pen ready. Diane glanced at him, then back to me. I wanted to talk about the house, obviously. But maybe we could start with how you're doing? How the job is going? I'm not doing this. Tell me what you want, or this meeting is over. The fake pleasantries dropped. Her face hardened into something familiar. The expression she'd worn for 3 years whenever she looked at me. The house should be family property. Mom and Dad wouldn't have wanted you to have everything while I got nothing. They left you $200,000. They left me a mortgage. Because they knew you'd blow through cash and needed the house for stability. That's not fair and you know it. They should have split everything equally. But they didn't. They made their choice. And her divorce wasn't her fault, she continued, like I'd asked. Her ex was controlling and took half her money in the settlement. She'd been trying to rebuild, but everything was so expensive now. The house sale could help her get back on her feet. Start over properly. I watched Luca write everything down, his face neutral and professional. When she finally stopped talking, I waited a few seconds to make sure she was done. The house is mine legally. I've been paying the mortgage for 3 years. You got your inheritance, I got mine. Your abandoning me in Rome doesn't create any obligation. She leaned forward. But we're family. Family helps each other. You helped yourself to my passport and wallet. You helped yourself to my phone. You helped yourself to teaching me a lesson about entitlement. I'd say you've helped enough. Diane tried the guilt angle next, her voice getting softer. I know I made mistakes, but Mom and Dad would want us to take care of each other. They'd want the house money shared between us. That's what family loyalty means. I almost laughed. You're talking to me about family loyalty? You left me in a foreign country with 40 euros. The embassy was closed. I had nowhere to stay. And you took pictures of my documents just to prove you could have helped but chose not to. That was wrong. I admit that. I was angry about the inheritance and I took it too far. But that doesn't change the fact that we're sisters. We're the only family each other has left. Luca kept writing, documenting every word. I felt calm, clearer than I'd felt in years. The house is mine. What I do with it is my decision. You don't get a vote. She switched tactics again, tears starting to form. I'm broke. My ex took everything in the divorce. I'm working retail, living in a studio apartment. I can barely afford groceries. I need help to survive. I felt a small flicker of sympathy. She did look rough, tired and desperate in a way I'd never seen before. Then she added, You owe me for forcing me to take the cash instead of the house. If I'd gotten the house, I'd still have equity, still have something stable. But you manipulated Mom and Dad into giving it to you. Luca actually laughed, a short, surprised sound. Diane's head snapped toward him. Something funny? You're claiming she manipulated your dying parents into changing their will? That's your legal position? Because I'd love to hear you make that argument in court. I kept my voice level, pushing down the anger. I'll consider selling the house eventually, but any money from that sale is mine alone. If I choose to give you anything, it will be a gift, not an obligation, not something you're owed. She started crying for real now, tears running down her face. You're heartless. I'm your sister and I'm asking for help. Family is supposed to help each other in hard times. You didn't help me in my hard time. You created it. I was at the Trevi Fountain for 3 hours waiting for you. 3 hours thinking maybe you'd been hurt or lost. Then I found out you'd checked out of the hotel that morning. Planned the whole thing. Diane wiped her eyes, mascara smearing. I was trying to teach you a lesson. About not taking things for granted. About being grateful for what you have. I am grateful. I'm grateful Luca found me. I'm grateful his family took me in. I'm grateful I built a life here that has nothing to do with you. Luca set down his pen, his voice taking on a formal tone. I should mention that what you did constitutes several crimes under both Italian and international law. Theft of documents, abandonment, potentially fraud depending on how you obtained those documents. If my client chose to pursue charges, you could face serious legal consequences. Diane went pale, the color draining from her face. I didn't think about it like that. It was just between sisters. A teaching moment. Luca smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Theft is theft, regardless of family relationship. So is document fraud. You might want to consider that before making further demands. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. I stated my position clearly, letting each word land with weight. You and I have no relationship beyond legal necessity. I'll handle the house situation on my own timeline. You're not to contact me directly anymore. Any communication goes through Luca's firm. If you show up at his office again or try to reach me another way, we'll pursue those criminal charges. Do you understand? Diane nodded, still pale, gathering her purse with shaking hands. I just wanted us to work things out. Like sisters should. We're not sisters anymore. You made that choice at the fountain. She stood, tears still falling. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. Maybe. But sorry doesn't fix anything. She left without another word, walking out into the Rome morning. Through the cafe window, I watched her hail a taxi, her shoulders hunched and defeated. Luca touched my arm gently. How do you feel? I took a breath, surprised by the answer. Relieved. I feel relieved. It's finally over. He nodded, closing his notepad. It's over. She won't bother you again. And if she does, we have everything documented. I sipped my coffee, watching the street where her taxi had disappeared. Part of me felt bad seeing her like that, so broken down from the person she used to be. But mostly I just felt free. Free from her resentment, her demands, her anger about the inheritance. Free to build my life here without looking over my shoulder. Over the next week, I focused on practical stuff I'd been avoiding. My tourist visa was going to expire soon. I'd been in Italy for months without thinking about it. Luca mentioned one morning that his colleague handled immigration cases. Her name was Mia, and she worked 2 floors down from his office. I made an appointment for that Thursday. Mia's office was smaller than Luca's, but covered in files and folders stacked everywhere. She was maybe 30, wore glasses, and spoke English with barely any accent. I explained my situation while she took notes. Tourist visa expiring, no current legal status to stay, living with Luca, but not married. She nodded through all of it, not judging, just processing. She laid out 3 options. Student visa if I enrolled in language school. Work visa if I found a job, though that required an employer willing to sponsor me. Partnership visa based on my relationship with Luca. Each had different paperwork, different timelines, different costs. The partnership route was fastest, 6 weeks maybe, but it required proving our relationship was real and stable. Photos together, shared bills, statements from family. Mia said couples who'd been together only a few months sometimes got denied because officials assumed they were faking it for visa purposes. I thanked her and left with a folder full of information. Walking back to the apartment, I felt overwhelmed by the choices. Each path meant committing to something different about my future here. That evening, I looked up language schools online. There was one near our apartment that had good reviews. The director's name was Alice, and she answered my email within an hour. Classes started the following Monday. Beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I'd pick up conversational Italian from living with Luca and his family, but I couldn't read legal documents or handle anything complex. I signed up for intermediate classes, 3 mornings a week. The school occupied the 2nd floor of an old building with marble stairs and high ceilings. Alice met me at the door on Monday. She was maybe 50, Italian but spoke perfect English. She'd lived in Boston for 10 years before moving back to Rome. She showed me to a classroom with 8 other students sitting around a long table. The other students were from everywhere. A guy from Brazil who worked remotely for a tech company. A woman from Japan whose husband was Italian. An Australian girl who'd come for a semester abroad and never left. 2 Americans, a German couple, and someone from Morocco. We went around introducing ourselves in broken Italian. Most of them had visa problems too. Expired tourist visas, work permits that fell through, relationship complications. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone in this mess. After class, the Brazilian guy invited me for coffee. His name was Paulo, and he'd been dealing with visa renewals for 3 years. Every time his tourist visa expired, he had to fly to another EU country and come back to reset the clock. It was expensive and exhausting. He was trying to get a work visa, but Italian bureaucracy moved slowly. The Japanese woman joined us. Her name was Yuki, and she'd been waiting 8 months for her spouse visa to process, even though she was legally married to an Italian citizen. I went home that afternoon and told Luca about the class. He was making dinner, chopping vegetables at the counter. He asked which visa route I'd chosen. I said I was leaning toward the student visa. He stopped chopping and turned to look at me. Why not the partnership visa? It's faster and we're together anyway. I tried to explain that using our relationship for legal status felt wrong when we'd only been together a few months. What if things didn't work out? What if we broke up and I was stuck here on a visa based on a relationship that didn't exist anymore? He put down the knife and crossed his arms. So you think we're going to break up? That's not what I meant. I just need to build my life here on my own terms. Not just as your girlfriend. Not dependent on you for everything. He looked hurt. I'm not asking you to be dependent. I'm offering to help because I love you and I want you to stay. We didn't finish the conversation that night. He went quiet during dinner and we watched TV without really talking. The next morning, he apologized for getting defensive. I apologized for making it sound like I didn't trust us. We talked it through over coffee. He understood why I needed to do this myself, even if it was harder. I understood why he worried about the complications of student visa renewals and restrictions. We compromised. I'd pursue the student visa now. If we were still together in a year and things were solid, we could look at the partnership visa then. A few days later, my phone rang while I was at the market buying groceries. It was Crystal, my old coworker from Ohio. She sounded worried. Diane had been showing up at the office asking about me. The first time, my former boss told her I'd quit and move to Italy. Diane came back the next day demanding my contact information. Then again the day after that. Crystal said Diane looked bad. Messy hair, wrinkled clothes, talking too loud. She kept saying she needed to reach me, that it was urgent family business. My boss threatened to call security if she came back again. I thanked Crystal for the warning and hung up. Diane was getting worse, more desperate. I forwarded Crystal's message to Luca so he knew what was happening. That same week, I contacted a real estate attorney in Ohio named Camelia. Luca had recommended her through his firm's American contacts. I explained the situation over email. The house I'd inherited. Diane's demands for half. The fact that I was living in Italy now. Camelia asked me to send copies of the deed and mortgage documents. I dug through my email until I found the PDFs from when my parents died. Camelia called me 2 days later. She'd reviewed everything. The house was solely in my name. Diane had no legal claim to it whatsoever. The will was clear. I'd inherited the property. Diane had inherited the cash. End of story. Camelia suggested 3 options. Sell the house and keep all the proceeds. Rent it out and use the income. Or just hold on to it and let Diane know definitively that she had zero claim and needed to stop harassing me. I asked what she'd recommend. Camelia said if I wasn't planning to move back to Ohio, selling made the most sense. The market was decent right now. I could pay off the remaining mortgage and walk away with some cash. I told her I'd think about it. A few days later, Camelia called again. She'd been asking around about Diane, talking to people who knew our family. Apparently, Diane had been spreading lies all over town, telling people I'd stolen her inheritance, that I'd abandoned the family, that I'd moved to Italy and left her with nothing. The stories were circulating through our parents' old friends, their church community, everyone who'd known us growing up. Camelia said she'd heard it from 3 different people in one day. I sat on Luca's couch listening to this and felt a weird mix of anger and sadness. Diane was rewriting history to make herself the victim, making me the villain in her story. It hurt hearing that people believed her, but I was so far away and so happy that I couldn't let it destroy me. Those people didn't know the truth. They didn't know she'd abandoned me at Trevi Fountain. They didn't know about the email calling me entitled. Let them believe whatever they wanted. October arrived and Luca's mother called to invite me to the family vineyard. They were harvesting grapes and needed extra hands. Luca and I drove out on a Saturday morning. The vineyard spread across rolling hills, rows and rows of vines heavy with dark purple grapes. His parents were already there with his uncle and 2 cousins. Everyone wore old clothes and carried buckets. His mother handed me gloves and showed me how to cut the grape clusters without damaging the vines. The work was harder than I expected. Bending over for hours, carrying heavy buckets, the sun beating down even though it was October. My back ached after the first hour. But being included in this family tradition meant everything. His father walked the rows with me, teaching me about the different grape varieties. Sangiovese, Montepulciano, Trebbiano. He explained how the soil and weather affected the flavor, how they decided when to harvest based on sugar levels and acidity. We worked until sunset, then gathered at a long table outside the main house. Luca's mother brought out platters of food. Fresh bread, cheese, olives, pasta with tomato sauce, wine from last year's harvest. Everyone talked and laughed in rapid Italian. I caught maybe half of it, but it didn't matter. I was part of this. Part of their family, their traditions, their life. Luca squeezed my hand under the table and smiled. His father raised his glass and said something in Italian that made everyone laugh. Luca translated quietly. He said you picked grapes faster than me on my first harvest. You're officially Italian now. I looked at the cousin who'd asked about my family, trying to find words that wouldn't make the whole table uncomfortable. My parents died a few years ago. My sister and I don't really talk anymore. She nodded slowly, her expression shifting to something that looked almost sad. In Italy, family is everything. Even when we fight, we still come together. Estrangement is very rare here. I smiled and changed the subject, but her words stayed with me for days. The Italian approach to family felt completely different from what I'd known. They fought loudly, disagreed openly, but never walked away. Diane and I had just stopped being sisters, and nobody in Ohio had thought it was strange. Here, it seemed almost unthinkable. My Italian classes started the following week at the school Alice ran near the city center. The classroom held about 15 students, all adults trying to navigate life in Rome. I sat next to a woman from Brazil who introduced herself as Marina, and a quiet man from Japan named Kenji. We were all at roughly the same level, stumbling through verb conjugations and getting confused by gendered nouns. After the first class, Marina suggested we form a study group. We started meeting at different cafes 3 times a week, ordering espresso and practicing conversation. Marina was funny and outgoing, always making jokes in broken Italian that had us all laughing. Kenji was more reserved but incredibly patient, helping me understand grammar concepts I kept messing up. Having friends who weren't connected to Luca felt important somehow. I was building my own life here, not just existing in his world. A message popped up on my phone one evening while I was cooking dinner. It was from someone named Savannah, who I vaguely remembered as one of Diane's friends from Ohio. The message was long and apologetic. She said she felt weird reaching out, but thought I should know what was happening. Diane had been calling her constantly since the divorce, sometimes crying about being broke, sometimes raging about how I'd betrayed her. Savannah said Diane was talking about coming back to Rome, that she needed to make me understand something. The message ended with a warning to be careful because Diane wasn't thinking clearly. I stared at my phone, feeling my stomach tighten. The idea of Diane showing up again made me anxious in a way I hadn't felt since September. I showed Luca the message immediately. He read it twice, his expression hardening. He made 2 phone calls in rapid Italian, then switched to English to explain what he'd done. Building security at his office and our apartment now had Diane's photo and instructions not to let her in. His firm was also preparing a formal cease and desist letter stating that any further harassment would result in legal action. I hated that it had come to this, that my own sister required legal threats to stay away. But Diane's behavior was getting worse, not better. She'd moved from demanding money to making threats, and I couldn't pretend that was normal family conflict anymore. Luca pulled me close and promised that she wouldn't get near me again. The student visa application process turned into a complete nightmare. Alice helped me gather the required documents, but the list seemed endless. Birth certificate with official translation and apostille. Bank statements proving I had enough money to support myself. Proof of enrollment in the language school. Police clearance from Ohio. Health insurance documentation. Every single paper needed to be translated by a certified translator, then stamped with an apostille to prove it was legitimate. I spent hours at the American consulate, the Italian immigration office, and various government buildings. The deadlines were tight, and one missing document could mean rejection. If the visa didn't go through, I'd have to leave Italy while appealing, which could take months. The stress kept me awake at night, imagining having to go back to Ohio and start over. Luca found me at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by paperwork and looking overwhelmed. He sat down and suggested something I hadn't considered. I could work remotely for American companies while on a student visa. It would supplement my savings and give me income without violating visa restrictions. The idea made sense immediately. I started updating my resume that night, reaching out to contacts from my old job, researching companies that hired remote workers. Having my own money again would mean I wasn't just living off savings and depending on Luca's generosity. It would give me independence and purpose beyond just studying Italian. I sent out applications for the next 2 weeks, tailoring my resume for administrative and project management positions that could be done entirely online. 3 weeks later, a company based in California offered me a part-time remote position doing administrative work. The pay was decent, around $1,500 a month for 20 hours of work. The time difference actually worked in my favor since they needed someone available during their evening hours, which was morning in Rome. Best of all, it was completely legal under student visa terms as long as I reported the income properly. I accepted immediately and started the following Monday. Having my own income again felt incredible. I wasn't just Luca's girlfriend living in his apartment anymore. I was contributing, earning, building something of my own. The work itself was straightforward, mostly organizing files and scheduling meetings, but it gave me structure and financial independence. An email from Diane appeared in my inbox a few days later, ignoring the cease and desist completely. The message was long and rambling, swinging between different emotional tones. She'd moved into a studio apartment and was working retail at some clothing store. The email blamed me for her reduced circumstances, saying that if I'd just sold the house and given her half, she wouldn't be struggling. Then it switched to pleading, asking for just $20,000 to help her get back on her feet. Then it turned angry again, accusing me of ruining her life by abandoning my responsibilities. I read it once, forwarded it to Luca without responding, and deleted it. Engaging with Diane only encouraged her. The cease and desist had clearly meant nothing to her. Camelia called from Ohio with news that made my blood run cold. Someone had tried to file a claim against my house, alleging co-ownership based on family inheritance laws. The claim was clearly Diane's work, though she'd used a different attorney who apparently hadn't bothered to research the actual deed. Camelia had gotten it dismissed easily since the will and property records were crystal clear. But the attempt showed how desperate Diane had become, how willing she was to lie in legal documents. Camelia warned me that Diane might try other schemes, that I thanked her and said I'd think about it, but I already knew what I needed to do. I couldn't keep dealing with Diane's schemes from across the ocean. Every few weeks brought some new crisis, some new attempt to get money or force my hand. The house in Ohio was just an anchor now, tying me to a place and a life I'd left behind. I called Camelia back the next day and authorized her to list the property for sale. It was time to cut that final tie to Ohio and fully commit to building my life in Italy. The house had been my parents' legacy, but it had also been a source of conflict and resentment. Selling it meant closing that chapter completely. Camelia promised to handle everything and find a good buyer. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. Luca and I went to the same small restaurant where he'd first helped me, the one where everyone knew his name and the owner hugged him like family. The waiter brought us wine without asking, remembering what we'd ordered months ago when I was stranded and scared. Luca reached across the table and took my hand. I was worried you were keeping the house as a backup plan. Like if things didn't work out here, you could just go back. I squeezed his fingers and told him that selling meant I was choosing this life on purpose, not just falling into it because I had nowhere else to go. The house was my parents' legacy, but holding on to it kept me tied to a place that didn't feel like home anymore. He smiled in that way that made his whole face soften. I'm glad you're staying. Not because you have to, but because you want to. We ordered the same pasta his mother made, and I realized how much had changed since that first terrified night when I'd had nothing but 40 euros and a sister who hated me. The email from Mia arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November. Subject line said, visa approval, and my hands shook opening it. The student visa had gone through. I could legally stay in Italy for the next year while continuing my language classes. I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood correctly, then called Luca at work, even though he was probably in a meeting. He answered on the first ring. It's approved. I can stay. He let out a breath I didn't know he'd been holding. I'll take you to lunch. We need to celebrate properly. Mia scheduled a meeting for that afternoon to walk me through all the restrictions and renewal requirements. I couldn't work more than 20 hours per week on this visa. I had to maintain enrollment in the language school. I needed to report any address changes within 2 weeks. The rules felt overwhelming, but having legitimate status made everything more real and stable. I wasn't just a tourist overstaying anymore. I had actual legal permission to build a life here. Camelia called in mid-December with news about the house. We have an offer. Full asking price cash buyer, wants to close before the end of the year. My stomach flipped even though I'd been expecting this. The house sold for $215,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and Camelia's fees, I cleared about $85,000. It wasn't enough to retire or anything crazy, but it was security. It was proof that my parents had left me something valuable, even if Diane spent years resenting the inheritance split. Camelia handled all the paperwork remotely. I signed documents electronically, watching my last tie to Ohio disappear with each digital signature. The money hit my American bank account 3 days before Christmas. I stared at the balance on my phone, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't Diane's little sister anymore, or the girl who got stuck with mortgage payments while her sister got cash. I was someone who'd turned abandonment into opportunity, who'd built something real from nothing. The messages started the day after Christmas. Diane must have heard about the sale through hometown gossip, probably from someone at the title company or a neighbor who'd seen the sold sign. Her first text was almost polite. I heard the house sold. We should talk about splitting the money fairly. Then another one an hour later. Mom and Dad would want us to share everything equally. You know that's true. By evening, she'd sent 15 messages, each one angrier than the last. You can't just keep all that money. I'm your sister. I have rights. Half of that should be mine. I forwarded everything to Luca without responding. He had his firm draft a formal letter that went out the next morning. Diane received her inheritance of $200,000 from our parents' savings. The house was left solely to the narrator per the will. Her financial choices regarding her inheritance are not the narrator's responsibility. Any further contact will be considered harassment and will result in legal action. No additional communication will be acknowledged. Diane sent 3 more messages after that, but I deleted them without reading. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. Opening an Italian bank account took an entire afternoon of paperwork and translations, but by mid-January I had my own account at a local branch near our apartment. I transferred most of the house money there, keeping some in my American account for emergencies. Sitting with a financial advisor, I invested about half in conservative funds and kept the rest liquid. For the first time since my parents died, I felt actually independent. Not living on savings or Luca's generosity or hoping my remote work would last. I had a cushion. I had options. I could stay in Italy because I wanted to, not because I was trapped. The advisor, a woman named Clara who spoke careful English, walked me through tax implications and reporting requirements. Having money in 2 countries created complications, but they were manageable complications. Rich people problems, my mother would have called them. Though $85,000 wasn't exactly rich, but it was mine. Earned through years of mortgage payments and stress, and nobody could take it away from me. Christmas with Luca's family happened at his parents' house in the countryside, a sprawling celebration that started Christmas Eve and lasted 3 days. I counted 27 relatives at dinner, maybe more. People kept arriving with food and wine and children who ran screaming through the house. His mother had been cooking for a week. The table bent under the weight of dishes I couldn't name. Traditional recipes passed down through generations. His grandmother, who spoke no English and whose Italian I could barely follow, sat next to me and patted my hand throughout the meal. After dessert, she disappeared and came back with a small velvet box. She pressed it into my hands and spoke in rapid Italian that Luca translated. This belonged to my mother. I want you to have it. Welcome to our family. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a tiny cross, old and beautiful and obviously precious. I started crying right there at the table, surrounded by people who'd accepted me completely despite barely knowing me. His grandmother hugged me and said something that made everyone laugh. Luca whispered the translation. She says you cry like a proper Italian now. Very dramatic. His father raised his wine glass. To family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose. The intermediate Italian class started in January with 8 students instead of the 20 in the beginner level. Alice taught this one too, moving faster and expecting more. I could handle most daily conversations now without struggling for words. I could read simple texts and menus and signs. I could understand much more of what Luca's family discussed at dinner, though they still spoke too fast when they got excited. The grammar still tied my brain in knots, all those verb conjugations and gendered nouns and exceptions to every rule. But the language barrier that had seemed impossible 6 months ago was actually manageable. I'd never be perfectly fluent, not like a native speaker, but I could function. I could have real conversations. I could argue with the phone company about our bill and understand the contract I was signing for the apartment. Alice told me I was one of her best students, that most people gave up when things got hard. I didn't tell her that giving up would mean going back to Ohio, back to nothing. Staying meant learning. The California company called in February wanting to increase my hours. They needed someone to handle more client communication and file organization, willing to pay almost double for full-time work. I checked with Mia about my visa restrictions. She said full-time remote work for an American company was technically allowed, as long as I reported the income properly, and didn't work for Italian companies without a work visa. I accepted the new position and started working 40 hours a week, earning enough to actually contribute to household expenses instead of just covering my personal stuff. Luca and I sat down one evening with a spreadsheet and divided everything fairly. Rent, utilities, groceries, internet. I insisted on paying my half even though he earned more. He understood why it mattered. I needed to feel like an equal partner, not someone he was supporting out of charity. We negotiated and compromised and ended up with a split that felt right to both of us. Having my own income again changed how I felt about everything. I wasn't just Luca's American girlfriend living in his apartment anymore. I was building something of my own. The letter arrived at Luca's office in late February, forwarded through his firm's mail system. Diane had written it by hand. 3 pages of cramped writing that probably took her hours. Luca brought it home and handed it to me without comment. I read it standing in our kitchen while he made dinner. Diane said she was in therapy now, working through her issues with a counselor who specialized in family conflict. She acknowledged that abandoning me in Rome was wrong, that she'd been cruel and vindictive and had let resentment poison her judgment, but she still insisted the inheritance split was unfair, that our parents should have divided everything equally, that she deserved more than she got. The last paragraph asked if we could eventually rebuild our relationship, maybe start with emails or phone calls, work toward actually being sisters again. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe I never would be. Diane had made her choice at the Trevi Fountain when she walked away and left me with nothing. I'd made my choice by building a life without her. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. I showed the letter to Luca's mother the next Sunday when we went to their house for lunch. She read it carefully, her lips pressed thin, then handed it back. Family is important. Forgiveness is important. But you don't owe her a relationship after what she did. She poured me more wine and continued. In Italy, we value family above almost everything. We forgive. We stay connected even when it's hard. But what your sister did wasn't a mistake or a fight. She abandoned you in a foreign country with nothing. She tried to destroy you. That's not family. That's cruelty. Luca's father nodded from across the table. You have a family now. Us. You don't need her. His mother touched my hand. If you want to forgive her someday, that's your choice. But don't let anyone tell you that you must. Some people don't deserve second chances. Her support for my boundaries, even while clearly valuing family loyalty above almost everything else, made me feel less guilty about keeping distance from Diane. I didn't have to fix what my sister had broken. I could just move forward with the family I'd chosen, the one that had chosen me back. February marked 6 months since I'd moved to Italy. 6 months since Diane left me at the Trevi Fountain with nothing. I woke up one morning in Luca's apartment and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about Ohio. My old life felt like something that happened to someone else. The scared woman waiting outside that hotel didn't exist anymore. I spoke Italian now. I had friends here. I worked remotely for a California company and contributed to rent. I'd built something real from absolutely nothing. Luca brought up the apartment situation over breakfast. We should find a bigger place. Something we choose together. This is my apartment. I want us to have our apartment. I'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't known how to say it. Living in his space always felt temporary, like I was a guest who'd overstayed. Finding our own place would mean we were building something together instead of me just fitting into his existing life. We started looking that weekend. The first 3 apartments were too expensive or too small or in neighborhoods that didn't feel right. The 4th place was in Monteverde, quieter than Trastevere but still close to everything. 2 bedrooms so we could each have workspace. Big windows, a tiny balcony. The landlord wanted references and proof of income. Luca handled the negotiation in Italian while I provided my employment documentation and bank statements from the house sale. We signed the lease 2 weeks later. Moving our stuff together felt different from when I'd just shown up with 1 suitcase. We argued about furniture placement and compromised on paint colors. We split the security deposit and first month's rent exactly in half, even though Luca earned more. I needed to feel like an equal partner in this. Alice called me the week after we moved. I need help at the school. English speakers learning Italian. They need conversation practice with a native English speaker who actually speaks decent Italian now. You interested? The pay wasn't much, but it was perfect supplemental income. Teaching would force me to understand Italian grammar well enough to explain it to others. I accepted immediately. My first class was 3 students. An Australian woman married to an Italian. 2 Americans working remotely. A Japanese man studying art history. They were all going through the same struggles I'd faced months ago. The Australian couldn't understand her mother-in-law. The Americans were homesick. The Japanese student felt isolated by the language barrier. I helped them practice ordering food, asking directions, making small talk. Simple stuff that had terrified me back in May. Watching them struggle with pronunciation that now came naturally to me showed how far I'd actually come. I wasn't just surviving here anymore. I was thriving in ways I never had back in Ohio. Savannah sent me a message in mid-February. Diane's doing better. She doesn't talk about you constantly anymore. She's working retail but steady. Still in therapy. Started dating someone new. Nothing serious, but she seems less angry. I read the message 3 times. It was the first neutral news about Diane in months. Not apologetic, not demanding, just information suggesting maybe she was actually moving forward with her life instead of staying stuck in resentment. I didn't respond to Savannah, but I saved the message. Maybe someday I'd be ready for limited contact with Diane. That day wasn't today, and I was okay with that. I caught myself one afternoon walking home from Italian class. I'd stopped at my favorite cafe, ordered in Italian without thinking about it, made plans with friends for the weekend, discussed work projects with Luca. My entire daily life happened in Rome now. I rarely thought about Ohio anymore. My friendships were here. My work was here. My future was here. The house sale had closed that chapter completely. Italy wasn't a temporary adventure or an escape anymore. It was genuinely home in ways Ohio never had been. Luca came home from work with news. The firm wants to hire you. Contract position. You'd help with English language documents and American client communications. Better pay than your remote job. You'd use your native language as an actual asset. I stared at him. Working at his firm meant more stability, better income, a real career path instead of just remote admin work. But it also meant working in the same office as my boyfriend. I asked about the details. The position was legitimate. They genuinely needed someone bilingual for American contracts. Mia had suggested me after seeing how much I'd learned. I gave notice to the California company that week and accepted the firm's offer. Working at Luca's firm created weird dynamics we hadn't expected. We had to maintain professionalism at the office while being partners at home. The first few days were awkward. Other lawyers watched us carefully to see if we'd be inappropriate. We established boundaries fast. No personal discussions during work hours. No case talk during dinner unless it was urgent. We kept our relationship separate from our professional roles. It helped that my work focused on document review and client calls rather than direct collaboration with Luca's contracts. We saw each other at the office but worked independently most of the time. Mia pulled me aside in late February. You should convert your student visa to a work visa now that you're employed here. It's more stable long-term. Doesn't require ongoing class enrollment, though you can keep taking lessons if you want. She walked me through the application process. More paperwork, more translations, more proof of employment and income. But a work visa meant I could stay in Italy based on my actual career instead of pretending to be a full-time student. The firm provided documentation supporting my application. Mia helped me file everything correctly. The process would take weeks, but having it started felt like another step toward permanent stability here. I still went to Italian class twice a week even though I didn't need it for visa purposes anymore. My grammar had improved enough to teach conversation classes, but I wanted to keep learning. The intermediate level focused on complex tenses and formal writing. Skills I'd need for reviewing legal documents properly. Learning felt different now that it served my actual career instead of just helping me survive daily life. Every lesson made me more valuable to the firm and more confident in my ability to build a real future here. I walked to the Trevi Fountain on a Saturday morning when tourists packed the area. The last time I stood here, I'd been waiting for Diane to come back from the bathroom. 3 hours I'd waited, getting more scared with each passing minute. Now I pushed through the crowds to the same spot near the left side where I'd stood that day. The fountain looked exactly the same. Water cascaded over the carved stone. Coins glittered at the bottom. But everything else had changed completely. That scared girl with 40 euros in her pocket didn't exist anymore. I pulled a coin from my wallet and held it tight. The tradition said throwing a coin meant you'd return to Rome. I didn't need to return because I already lived here. Instead, I made a different wish. I wished to stay forever. The coin splashed into the water and sank among thousands of others. Camelia emailed 3 days later with the final paperwork. The Ohio house sale had closed. All the documents needed my electronic signature to terminate my remaining legal connections to the property. I sat at Luca's kitchen table with my laptop and clicked through page after page. Digital signatures went on deed transfers, mortgage releases, tax documents. Each signature felt like cutting another thread tying me to my old life. My parents had bought that house 30 years ago. I'd grown up in those rooms, but it had never really been mine even after they died. It had just been a burden I inherited along with the grief. The last document processed and Camelia sent a confirmation email. The sale was complete. The money sat in my Italian bank account. That chapter was officially over. Luca came home from work and found me still sitting at the table staring at the closed laptop. He asked if I was okay. I told him about signing the papers. He sat down across from me and asked how I felt. I thought about it for a minute. I felt free. The house had been an anchor keeping part of me tied to Ohio even while the rest of me built a life here. Now that anchor was gone. We talked late into the night about what we wanted long-term. Marriage eventually, maybe. Kids someday if we both wanted them. Where we saw ourselves in 5 years. Luca said he'd always planned to stay in Rome near his family. I said Rome felt more like home than Ohio ever had. We agreed we were taking things slow given how fast we'd come together. But the foundation felt solid. We wanted the same kind of life. That mattered more than timeline. My Brazilian friend from language class told us she was moving back to São Paulo the following week. Her work contract had ended and she missed her family. The Japanese student's visa expired around the same time. We met for goodbye drinks at our usual cafe. Everyone exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. But we all knew how these things went. Expat friendships were intense while they lasted because you were all going through the same struggles. Then people left, and you maybe sent a few messages before drifting apart. Walking home after the goodbye dinner, I realized I needed deeper roots here. Friends who weren't temporary. Luca's family already felt permanent. I needed to build more connections with local people who weren't planning to leave in 6 months. Luca suggested we start taking weekend trips to other parts of Italy. We'd been so focused on Rome that I hadn't seen much of the country. He booked us train tickets to Florence for the next weekend. We walked through museums and ate pasta in tiny restaurants and climbed to the top of the Duomo. The next month we went to Venice, then the Amalfi Coast. Each place was completely different from Rome. Different food, different architecture, different dialects. Italy wasn't one thing. It was dozens of distinct cultures and landscapes packed into one country. Every trip made me appreciate how much there was to learn and explore. Every trip made me feel more connected to this place I now called home. The work visa approval came through in early March. Mia called me into her office to deliver the news personally. I had legal status to stay in Italy based on my employment at the firm. Combined with my savings from the house sale and steady income from my job, I finally felt secure. Not temporary, not precarious. Actually established. The visa was good for 2 years with option to renew. Mia said after 5 years of legal residency, I could apply for permanent status if I wanted. 5 years felt like forever, but also not that long. I thanked her about 15 times before leaving her office. Luca's parents invited us to a family gathering the following Sunday. His whole extended family came. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. Everyone crowded into his parents' house for a massive lunch that lasted 4 hours. After dessert, his father stood up and asked for everyone's attention. He announced in Italian that they were updating their will. He switched to English so I'd understand. They were including me as part of the family. Formal legal recognition. I stared at him in shock. His mother added that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice and love. They'd chosen me. I tried to say I didn't expect or need any inheritance. His father waved that away. This wasn't about money. This was about making official what was already true. I was family now. Luca squeezed my hand under the table. Several relatives came over after to hug me and welcome me officially. I cried more than I wanted to admit. That night, I opened my journal for the first time in months. I wrote about the past year. How Diane abandoning me in Rome had accidentally given me the push I needed to completely change my life. I still didn't forgive what she'd done. Stealing my documents and leaving me stranded was cruel no matter how you looked at it. But I could acknowledge something true. Staying in Ohio, paying that mortgage, resenting my circumstances had been a trap. I might never have escaped otherwise. I'd been stuck in grief and obligation and small-town thinking. Diane's cruelty had forced me into a situation where I had to rebuild from nothing. And rebuilding from nothing meant I got to choose what to build. I chose this. Italy. Luca. A career using my actual skills. A family that welcomed me without conditions. I wouldn't thank Diane for what she did, but I could admit the outcome was better than anything I'd planned for myself. My Italian improved to the point where I could handle complex conversations without struggling. Legal terminology at work. Debates about politics with Luca's father. Gossip with his mother while cooking. I started dreaming in Italian sometimes. Waking up and realizing the whole dream had been in another language felt strange and amazing. The language barrier that had seemed impossible to overcome was nearly gone. I could read legal documents without a dictionary. Argue with customer service when they tried to overcharge me. Joke with Luca's grandmother about her opinions on modern life. I was genuinely bilingual now. Not perfect, but fluent enough that language rarely stopped me from doing what I needed to do. The firm assigned me a major project in late March coordinating between the Rome and London offices. An American client needed contracts reviewed under both Italian and English law. My American perspective helped me understand what the client actually wanted versus what they said they wanted. My English fluency meant I could communicate nuances that got lost in translation. My growing Italian skills let me work directly with the Rome team without everything going through Luca. I spent 2 weeks going back and forth between offices, managing conference calls, reviewing documents. The project succeeded, and the client specifically mentioned my work in their feedback. I wasn't just Luca's girlfriend who needed a job anymore. I was a legitimate professional asset to the firm. That felt better than almost anything else about my new life. Luca surprised me with plane tickets to the coast in late March. His family owned a small house in a fishing village 2 hours from Rome. We drove there on Friday afternoon with the windows down and Italian pop music playing. The coast road wound through hills covered in wildflowers. I kept thinking about how different my life looked compared to a year ago. Back then, I was standing outside that hotel with 40 euros trying not to panic. Now I was driving to a beach house with someone who made me feel safe every single day. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the water. White walls, blue shutters, terrace with a view that made my chest hurt. Luca's grandmother used to spend summers here before she got too old to make the trip. Now the family took turns using it for weekends. We walked on the beach Saturday morning while the sun came up. The sand was cool under my feet. Luca stopped walking and turned to face me. He told me he knew from that first night at the restaurant that I was going to change his life. Something about the way I told my story without crying or asking for pity. The way I ate 3 plates of pasta even though I was scared. I laughed and said the feeling was mutual. He saved me in every way that mattered. Not just from being stranded, but from the small, angry life I was living in Ohio. We stayed until Sunday evening. I didn't want to leave. Back in Rome on Monday, I found a message waiting on my phone. From Diane. My stomach dropped when I saw her name. But the message was short. Just 3 sentences saying she was glad I was happy and that she was working on herself. No demands, no accusations, no requests for money. I stared at it for 10 minutes trying to figure out the angle. Luca read it over my shoulder and shrugged. Maybe she means it. Maybe therapy is helping. I saved the message but didn't respond. Maybe someday I would be ready for limited contact. But that day was not today, and I was okay with that. My life in Rome was everything I never knew I wanted. Meaningful work at the law firm where people respected my skills. Deep friendships with colleagues who invited me to dinner parties and weekend trips. Language school friends from 6 different countries who taught me curse words in their languages. Fluency in Italian that let me argue about politics with Luca's father and gossip with his mother while we cooked. Integration into his warm, chaotic family who treated me like I had always belonged. Financial stability from the house sale and my income that meant I never had to depend on anyone again. And Luca. A loving partnership with someone who saw me as an equal, who asked my opinion and listened to my answers, who made me laugh and challenged me and never once made me feel small. I woke up grateful every single day. Thursday evening, I stood on our apartment balcony watching the sunset turn Rome orange and gold. The city stretched out below me with its ancient buildings and modern chaos. I thought about how the worst thing Diane ever did to me became the best thing that ever happened. She tried to teach me a lesson about being entitled. Instead, she taught me that I could build an entire life from nothing in a foreign country. That I could turn abandonment into opportunity, that I could choose happiness over resentment. I was not the entitled princess she thought I was. I was a woman who survived and rebuilt and thrived. Italy was not where I ended up by accident. It was where I belonged.